We'd like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity for Legacy Partners. And this is fundraising and working with Elaine on fundraising. And so she's starting to she's starting to develop connections into very, very wealthy people, billionaires. And so in a way, they're they're just like you and I. Many of them come from nothing. They're just come from humble beginnings. And so many of them, in wealth, there's kind of two kinds of wealth. There's where you come from nothing, just poverty. You come from nothing and all of a sudden you're very wealthy. And then there's, I forget what they call it, money or, money wealth or something. And so there's moneyed wealth, like family. I forget, it's a specific name, but I don't remember it now. But it's so it's generational. So your parents or grandparents or great great grandparents had a lot of wealth, and so you just come from money. I think that's what it is. You come from money, and so um, in the book, I think it's Big and Small by Malcolm Gladwell. So um, very wealthy people, very wealthy people uh, are very suspect. They're they're always concerned about, are you just are you just connecting with them because you want access to their power or their money? Just telling Elaine about, I was coaching the president's wife of Moody Bible Institute. So Moody Bible Institute is, hundreds of years, over 100 years old. D.L. Moody, a famous Bible Christian college in Chicago. And I was coaching her. She moved to Nashville with her husband, and she went into real estate. And I was coaching her. And I said, "What's your biggest challenge?" And she said, "I don't know if women want to be my friends because of me, or if it's because I'm the president's wife of Moody Bible Institute." So people uh, they tend to be drawn to money and power. And I would say, I don't know if it's especially women, but it might be. So women love, when I say women, I don't mean all women. I'm just saying a lot of women. They love power. They love access to power. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it just is. It's okay. It's whatever. And so often very powerful men will have very powerful women around them. And so understanding these things are important. Um, Tom Coons helped raise over $100 million for Easter seals. Peter Miles, past board member of BMW, which was introduced to me through the board. He used to be on the board of directors for Tanglewood Conservatories. I have a hard time getting people to introduce me to people they know. And the main reason for that is because, from my perspective, people sense very quickly with me they can't control me. And they think Mark might get out of control. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying I disagree or agree. I'm just saying I think this is what it is. And so it's interesting that Alan and Nancy introduced me to Peter. That's unusual. And so once Tom and I were in the driveway of his house in Orange County, California, Southern California, and Melissa, she was in the back seat, I was in the front passenger seat, Tom was driving. And I said to Tom, Tom, can you give Melissa, um, pointers on if you were to introduce her to your friends, how would you, what would you recommend for her? And he said, treat them as if they were your own friends. Now, Tom is making an assumption there. And what's the assumption he's making, Elaine?
Not exactly sure.
He's making an assumption, that couple assumptions. One is that Melissa treats her friends well.
Okay.
And two is that when we say well, we mean the same way that he treats his friends. And so I've had a hard time transferring relationships over to other people. So when I go to Texas for a whole week with Kenny and introduce him to a whole bunch of people, none of it really stuck. None of it clicked. And I was surprised because people really liked him. I mean, Bill Hullum's wife absolutely adored him. I mean, we're sitting in a restaurant to eat, but they didn't have tables, so we sat at the bar. And I was talking to Bill, and Kenny was talking to Bill's wife. And there was a young woman that was the, bar, whatever. She was on the, she was serving at the bar. She was in her 20s or something. And 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 Bill's wife said, Kenny, talk to her, and he would. So she did. Found out all kinds of information about her. So she's trying to, connect him up. And he made such an impression on her that she said, so she started, because Kenny's interesting. Why? For multiple reasons, in part because he's Amish. So the Amish have this really cool brand by and large. It's not all, there's some parts of it that, people judge or whatever, but by and large, they have a really interesting brand. They're unusual. So that makes them interesting. That makes them stand out. So people are curious about that. Like, they don't know. They don't know, and they don't understand. So they're curious. And so just being Amish, as Elaine is, that makes her curious. That makes her interesting. And so because there is a fair amount of segregation, in the Amish community, like there are in a lot of communities, and when like a closed community, what I say closed, what I mean by that is it's like a very tight community. Like I was raised Baptist, and a lot of the people in the church went ahead and homeschooled their kids. It's a closed community. It's not good or bad. It just is what it is, and understanding that's important. And so I've had a hard time. I've had a hard time, and so like we went out, and so Kenny loved them. They loved Kenny, but Kenny's not following up with them.
I think for a relationship like that to start with different levels in society, where you're at in society, the lower level has to make a continuous point in reaching out to the upper level. The upper level won't reach down.
What's important for everybody to understand is when Elaine says upper and lower level, she's not putting a judgment on it. She's not saying that a lower level is worse. she's not saying it's low, it's bad or it's lower. I don't think she's saying that. She can correct me. She's just
No,
saying there's
no,
different levels, you know? So, being 5 feet tall is not, it's a lower level than being 6 feet tall. It doesn't mean you're worth less as a person to be lower level. Um,
correct.
yeah. And so the lower level um, doesn't understand. And so it could be age, it could be experience, it um, could be age, it could be experience, it could be education, it could be material wealth, it could be a whole bunch of things. And so, me being an international speaker and author, over 30% of the US population wants to write a book. And, but they don't. Well, I'm writing my 18th book. And so I have something, I've done something, and the people that are in high level, people who are wealthy, or people who have a lot of influence or affluence. So influence is they have power. They speak and something happens. People listen to them. They move people by their very voice and their very presence. And so often influence comes with affluence. When you have money, you often have power. Often, when you have power, you often have money. It's not always the case, but it's often the case. And so I have something they don't have. I've done something that most of them have not done, but they want to do. So, me being an author just gives me an advantage. After I finished my first book and I said, I'm an author, immediately people looked at me differently. I mean, they just looked at me differently. Personally, I think we're all creating God's image. Personally, I don't think there's any person better than somebody else. I think in God's eyes, they're all equal. They're all amazingly made. Every single human being is made in his image, and they're all put here for a really cool, interesting purpose. Most people don't look at themselves as being special or unusual, but I see them as special and unusual. Tom does not. He just comes from humble beginnings. And so a lot of people who have a lot of influence and power, they they don't they don't look at themselves as being different. It's almost like an imposter, but they're not. But they're like, you know, it's like, and so you become aware, but how their brains function is very different. People with affluence and influence, they think differently, very, very differently than other people. And so it's not it's not being afraid of how people think, and it's not being intimidated by how people think, and it's not being in awe of how people think, it's being aware. And so one of the things that you can do when you're working to work with high influence and affluence people is to go through the solution library or go through the white paper library. These white papers will help you to learn to think differently. They just will. So Tom Coons, we were doing partnership, so he and I co-authored the book Community Business Partnerships. And I don't know, we had talked for a year and a half together, never met in person. He resigned like a week before the book was to be released, which was kind of, it sucked. It's like, oh, that sucks. Had 250, a quarter of a million sales in books, and then it was just disappeared. And I said, because I knew I had a moment of time. And so I said, how about if we have lunch? Like, how about if I fly out there to meet you? And so I did at the airport. And we went and sat down. And I said, what are you planning on doing since you're retiring from Century 21? He said, I don't know. I said, how about if you and I partner together? And he's like, okay. And we set up a goal to reach, I don't know, $5 million or something. And I don't know, a couple years into that, we weren't making anything close to that together, not even close. And so I was a little nervous that he was going to dump me. Like I was nervous that it's like, why would he, why would he continue to hang out with me? So we were in Southern California doing kind of a book tour. And I said, Tom, I'm just curious, how do you think the relationship is, between you and I? How do you think it's going? The business stuff and friend. He's like, oh, it's going amazing. I said, really? And he says, yeah. I said, why? He says, I love hanging out with you. Now, this is not something I get a lot of. I don't have a lot of people who say, I love hanging out with you. Most people, it seems like, don't, which is okay. And so I said, why? And he says, it's how you think. He says, you think different than anybody I've ever met in the world. Guy had 140,000 agents in over 70 different countries. He traveled all over the world. He's met so many people. I mean, it's unbelievable. So he's met tens of thousands of people, and he's saying, you're different, Mark. You're way different. What do you mean? You think differently. What do you mean by that? So see, I'm curious. He sees something about me that I don't see. And he's like, Mark, we started out at 6 o'clock in the morning with a breakfast. You hit that breakfast, your brain was running like I've never seen anybody's run. It's like 11:30 at night. Your brain is still, it's on overdrive. He's like, I've just never met anybody like you. Years later, he said, he laughed and he said, Mark, you have like a photographic memory, auditory memory, and I don't really. I mean, what I look for is anomalies in what people are saying, something different, something that makes people different. I learned this from my four daughters. They all want to feel like they're the only girl in my life. This is true with boys too, especially with moms, girls with dads. Boys too with dads and girls with moms, but very strong the opposite sex. And so I laughed, and he said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You have photographic auditory memory." I say something 7 years ago, you never bring it up, and you remember it 7 years later. It's listening. It's just listening, and then it's the ability to communicate, to interact. So a lot of times people are fearful or intimidated from people with, power, and it's you don't need to be. In the book, and so Malcolm Gladwell, I encourage you to read those books, Tipping Point, Outliers, Blink, David and Goliath. The guy's like an amazing author. So fun to read his books. Like it's mesmerizing. But I think it's in David and Goliath where he talks about it, it's hard to raise it. He kind of talks about how it's hard to raise children if they're really, really poor, or you're really like not poor. If you're in the inner city, it's hard to raise children. But then he postates, he says, you know, but it's maybe equally as hard or even harder to raise very affluent children in a very affluent household where they don't have, like Bill Gates children don't have any, they don't have any need for money. Like they'll always have more than enough money to have a dad like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or something like that. It's like, how do you raise a child like that? So I wrote a white paper, children of affluent families. So learning to think differently is important. So if you're listening to this is not something that, we recommend that just anybody listens to. Like Elaine is being exposed to this because she's been a good steward with the 7 T's: time, talents, treasure, trust, truth, temple, and thought. Not only her 7 T's, but mine. So I'm connecting her with people that I've taken decades to find and or to have relationships with. I want her to have a relationship with Peter and Tom and a lot of the other people outside of my relationship. Like her relationship is not dependent upon my relationship. I want it to be independent of mine. So when, hopefully I will die before she does. So that goes on. One thing with affluent families, generational wealth, that's what they call it, generational wealth. In generational wealth, one of the things that, like the first generation, that would be me if I'm wealthy, like you work so hard to accumulate wealth, not to accumulate wealth because wealth, it's just, it's what you do. It's just what you do. And so it's not money hungry. It's not for that. I mean, money is the lowest value of the 30 values once I was evaluated. And so it's not money for money. Tom says what he loves most about money is that it buys him time. So you're looking for new little things about people that you can remember that somebody said, because when you listen to what people say, the little things, the anomalies, the outside of the box things, people think you're really paying attention. You really care. You're different. You're not looking for their money. You're not looking for their power. And so Elaine's working with another individual, and that individual, you know, doesn't have the status, but I want Elaine to work as much with that individual as I do with with Peter or Tom. But the people with a lot of money, like Alan and Nancy, took us to Dr. Steffi, sold his business for over 350 million. And Roseanne and I visited their, 1,600 acres in Pennsylvania, this castle, literally, with an elevator in their house. And it was just magnificent. I mean, just magnificent. And we got started talking, and so I don't drink alcohol. So he was giving me a hard time about that, which was fine. I'm okay. Like, it's okay. And he was studied in religion, like all kinds of religion. And we're having a really interesting, deep conversation. And then all of a sudden he breaks into tears and he says, "Come follow me." And we go into a study and it's cherry wood and it's beautiful. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And he brings over this little tiny book and he gives it to me. It's like a booklet. It's like a little tiny thing. And he gives it to me and he gives it to me. He said, "This is why I'm alive today." I didn't have a phone, so I didn't have a smartphone, so I didn't take a picture of it or write down the name of it, which I wish I had. But he started crying. And he talked about early years as a doctor and his wife, and he had 3 boys. And his wife and 3 sons all died in a fire in their house. And it was probably 40, 50 years before, and he was still crying. Like he still felt that. So a lot of times people who are very affluent and very, very, very wealthy, they've been hurt like you can't even imagine. And it's often because maybe of their wealth. And so they're just like all of us, but they're not. So having an understanding of this is where being exposed to new ways of thinking, and this is where the white paper, I'm telling you, you share the white paper, you read the white paper, and then you can't just read it. You have to dialogue. Like, what do you think about it? Like, what do you think about the white paper? What do you think about what's written? You need to learn how to interact. Don't be intimidated by people like Tom or Peter or the president of the US. Like, it's not, all you have to do is be curious, be like a 3-year-old. Like, just be like a 3-year-old. That's all you have to do. So, so Elaine has tremendous, like she has high EQ, emotional intelligence. She knew the lower has to take initiative to the higher. And then, Peter Schmidt, he went ahead and said, he was, he's 70, I think, 72 or something. And he said, "Well, I've got to gain value, financial value from working with Kenny. Otherwise, he's not going to do it." Kenny might feel that. Well, Kenny can give him financial value because he can connect the dots. But it takes tremendous amount of discipline. You have to see the value and you have to pursue it. So I'm not good yet now, up to this point, at showing other people the value of, and I think when Elaine meets the high level people like Peter, I think I'll say, this is what I see the value in Peter. And Elaine, I would pursue him, irregardless of me. And Peter, this is the value I see in Elaine. And so I'd be responsive to her, just like you are with me. And so it takes work. Having relationships and deep relationships, it takes work. It's risky. Like, don't worry about my relationships and blowing up my relationship. If you can blow up my relationship, then it wasn't that good of a relationship. I'm just saying, but that's not true with affluent and influential people. You have to be careful because the relationships often are not based on depth. It's based on surface. So when Peter said, I have 250 people in my Rolodex, so these are the people that are like his partner who has a home office, which is, they have billions of dollars literally, and they have so much money, they have a whole group of people that are just hired and directed to give away money. Millions of dollars. Ken Bucci, he has somebody who has a family office, if not more than one. And so Anita, his wife, would be a good person for Elaine to connect with. Often, it's men that are going to be powerful on the outside, but the women are equally powerful, if not more powerful, that are connected to the man, to the men. And so pursue them, the ones I introduce you to. If you're a woman, okay, my philosophy as a woman, you don't trust any men. Men are men, they're just men. Like, men are men. Be cautious, be careful. Don't trust any of them from a moral perspective. Just be careful with everything. Be cautious with everything and be aware that men are men, and so you have to be cautious. The men I introduce women to, I believe, have a lot of moral integrity. I would trust them with my wife and my daughter and my granddaughters as much as I would trust any man, including myself. Like I just, and so if you're a woman, it's okay to connect with a man. You just make sure you're careful. Just like for me, I try to be careful in connecting with women, especially if there's a big age difference. I try to be very careful about connecting. I'm more careful with younger women than I am women my age. And so, but I'm careful. I try to be careful. All the same thing is true with women. And so be careful. Anything you can do, you are a threat, especially if they're an older man and an older woman. You as a younger woman are going to be a threat to the wife. You just will. You might not look at yourself, but you will. And it's not just physical. It's mental. So men are drawn, especially powerful men. In the book Think and Grow Rich by anyways, I can't believe I forgot his name. But anyways, Think and Grow Rich, classic book. Powerful men are drawn to women who think differently, are willing to challenge, who are willing to engage and willing to say, hey, I'm not, and be curious about what they're thinking and why they're thinking it. And women can get men to do things. I was just talking to Elaine on the pre. Like, I was just reading about Jesus and his mother Mary. And his first miracle was turning water into wine. And like his mom calls him to this, to this wedding celebration, and they run out of wine. And so the mom knows he can turn water into wine. So she tells him, hey, you need to turn water into wine. And he's like, no, I can't. My time has not come. Like he said, it's not the right time. Like like he says, I can't do it. Like if you're Christian, you're like, he's the son of God. Like he is God. And it's like, I can't do it. And what's his mom do? Just ignore him. Like, just ignore him and just, he's going to do what he tells you to do. She just didn't even, she just ignored him and said, you're going to do this. And he did it. It's really interesting. So women understand the power, the influence, and use it properly, use it for mutual benefit. And so with these guys, I've known them for decades. Would they read something I ask them to read? Maybe not, but they would if you ask them, even though you're a stranger. So with a woman, you have to use the power that you have. So there's disadvantages in business to being a woman. People often, profile you and, stereotype you and say, you don't think and, you know, you're flip, you're this and that. So they have all these prejudice of women. Why? Well, because a lot of women are like that. It's just being honest. Men, you stereotype men. And so a lot of men are like that. That's why stereotypes come into existence, is because a lot of people in that group of people are like that. And so you can get men to do things that, other men can't do. Don't underestimate your ability to move men, to move powerful people. And so if the wife is available, for sure, connect with the wife. She doesn't get as much attention as the husband in most situations. And so one of the ways I test somebody's heart is how they treat the people around me. Are they after me just for money or, influence or affluence? Then they only want to talk to me. Are they, how do they respond to my wife? If somebody responds well to my wife, you know what? I'm gonna give them more. I'm gonna like that. I'm gonna watch that. I think a lot of men, and I want my wife to get more attention. She's an amazing woman. She's a spectacular woman. She really is. And so, but she's not gonna be as eloquent as me or as verbal as me, probably in a lot of things. And she's not gonna think like me. She's gonna think differently. That's not good or bad. And so people of affluence and influence they will think, so they want to be stimulated. They want somebody that's going to have a stimulating conversation. And again, these white papers will do it. I really want to write more white papers. I really do. I've got so much inside of me, but I can't do it kind of based on a rule. And that rule is, if people aren't reading the stuff that I've written, why write more? You know? Anyways, so a lot here, Elaine, that we've downloaded, just like Matrix, cable in the back of your neck, and just downloaded a whole bunch of stuff. Wasn't planning on doing it. Glad we did, I think. Questions, Elaine, or thoughts? You're on mute if you're talking. Okay. So if you're listening, go ahead. Maybe we can't. We might have an internet connection. I can
I
hear
was
you.
gonna say no, just trying to get it all to download correctly.
Yeah. And don't worry about it being correct. It can be incorrectly. The mind is really, really powerful and what it's able to do. And so you kind of absorb this. You take notes, you listen well, you look for anomalies, those types of things. Um, the person introducing you, be intentional with them. Like I have to be intentional. So I'm studying. When Jason and Kenny and I went out to the East Coast, met some amazing people, but Jason and Kenny aren't following through. When you're kind of from a closed community, a tight community, um, you don't really have to work to have friends, mostly. You have hundreds of people in your family, so you just kind of based on the social structure, you just kind of meet people. So you don't have to learn to go outside of because there's more than enough people in your own group. So you don't have to really go outside of the group. But in business, you have to learn how to do that. You have to learn how to go outside of your immediate group. You have to learn how to go into uncomfortable situations. You have to learn how to take initiative. You have to learn how to talk with total strangers and engage with them and move them and all kinds of stuff. So definitely talk to your mentor, your art mentor, and your two art buddies about this. If you found it interesting, why engage, ask questions, practice that, practice listening, and then engaging and asking, one or two questions about it. That's very important. Are you listening to them? So a lot of times people don't listen to, really affluent, influential people, and that's unfortunate because they really do know a lot. It's very, very interesting. Always remember we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye bye.